Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is my second lecture on chromatography 2A lecture. What is chromatography? It is a physical separation method in which we separate component of the mixture by difference in their distribution between two phases, one of which is stationary phase while the other is the moving mobile phase or the moving through it in a definite direction. The substance must interact with the stationary phase to be retained and separated by it. So there are two phases. One is mobile phase and other is the stationary phase. We put the mixture containing the component on the stationary phase, then mobile phase percolates on it and take the component of the uh, mixture. The component which have strong affinity with the mobile phase will move larger distance, and the component which have affinity with the stationary phase will retain on the stationary phase. Now chroma mean color, and it is the combination of two words, chroma and graphy, meaning something to sketch colored, but it also implies on the non-colored substances. It is first proposed by the Russian scientist Sweat, and now there are different components on the stationary phase. We add the sample having different component. These components have different affinity with the mobile phase and the stationary phase. Now the component which have high affinity to the stationary phase will retain on it in the stationary phase and will come out to the detector later, while the substance which have high affinity with the mobile phase but low affinity for the stationary phase, they will come faster in the detector than with the subcomponent of the mixture having high affinity to stationary phase. Now there are two phases, mobile phase which may be gas or liquid, that carries the mixture of the component through the stationary phase. The stationary phase, the part of the apparatus that holds the component as they move through it, separating them. So there are two phases, mobile phase and a stationary phase. Mobile phase may be gas or the liquid, and the stationary phase may be an adsorbent, a paper, a silica gel, a Castle or beads of different sizes, or ligands having different affinity with different component. Now the classification of the chromatography. Chromatography is classified into their depending upon their mechanism of action, their adsorption, partition, ion exchange, size exclusion, affinity. In adsorption, the component of the mixture and the mobile phase percolate on adsorb on the surface of the adsorbent, and in the partition there is the sub component of the mixture are uh, distributed between two mobile phases. One is the paper which having the water, and the mobile phase which is an hydrophobic substances such as hexane or alcohol, etc. So in partition chromatography, there is the distribution of the component of the mixture between two liquid phases. Ion exchange chromatography, there are different types of the ion exchanger. For example, positive and cationic and anionic. And if we are going to separate anion, we have two cation ion exchanger. And size exclusion chromatography, in this consider we separate the component depending upon their size, and the affinity, we have the ligand which have certain affinity with certain component of the mixture and they bind with it and are separated. Now the first is the adsorption chromatography. Adsorption chromatography is the oldest type of the chromatography. It utilized mobile liquid or gaseous phase that is adsorbed onto the surface of the stationary solid phase. The equilibration between the mobile and stationary phase accounts for the separation of different solute. So we have the certain adsorbents such as the silica gel. The component and the mobile phase is adsorbed. It has no chemical reaction with it. There is only uh, mm, a physical interaction such as no covalent interaction is there in the adsorption chromatography between the adsorbent and the component of the mixture and the mobile phase. But the hydrogen bonding or the weak electrostatic interaction may be built in the adsorbent and the component of the mixture and the mobile phase. This is called adsorbent chromatography. Adsorption chromatography. Now the partition, it is the form of the chromatography based on thin film formed for the surface of the solid sport by the liquid stationary phase. For example, we are taking the paper, Wattsman filter paper, which is composed of cellulose to water. Now it has water, cellulose having around it is the solute water. Now we dip it in the mobile phase. When mobile phase pass, the component of the mixture will be distributed between the water which is hold on the cellulose and the mobile phase which is the hydrophobic, which is for example hexane. So this is the partition in which the component of the mixture is partitioned between two liquids. Now this is the uh, apparatus of the partition chromatography. It is the strip of the Wattman filter paper, and we dip it and ink spot or spot here, and it will, so it has water and the mobile phase is also water. But if we will take alcohol instead, so it will percolate between two different water, and it is also called paper chromatography. So they are distributed according to their affinity with the mobile and the stationary phase, and which have the more stationary affinity with the more stationary phase, they will be remain in here, and which have the more affinity with the mobile phase will be eluted first. Now the column chromatography, it is a type of the adsorption chromatography in which the column is filled with certain adsorbent such as silica gel, kesal gur, etc., alumina, and then this is called chromatography column, and this column is filled with stationary phase. Mixture to be separated is dissolved in the mobile phase and is applied here. Then we add mobile phase, either the N-hexane or alcohol. Then in the second phase, the component of the mixture have different affinity with the adsorbent, and they will be separate out according to their affinity with their affinity with the mobile phase and the stationary phase. The component of the mixture which have, and we are constantly providing with the mobile phase which is the liquid in this case, and then it is eluted, and this eluted which has the more affinity with the mobile phase will be eluted first, will come out first, and which has the affinity with the stationary phase we will be come out eluted in the last. Now there are certain terms which are applied. For example, the retention time. It is the time which take particular component of the mixture to pass through the column, to pass through the system under set of condition. For example, uh, a component take 1 hour to come out of the column, so it is 1 hour, it is the retention time. Eluent, it is the solvent that will carry the analyte, the solvent, the mobile phase which will carry the component of the mixture. Now it is the RF value. RF value, relative rate of flow. RF value mean relative rate of flow. It is equal to the distance moved by the substance divided by the distance moved by the solvent. This equation is taken only for the paper chromatography and for the thin layer chromatography, where we apply a small amount of the substance on the paper or on the thin layer chromatography. So the distance moved by the substance divided by the distance traveled by the mobile phase, and for substances that are very soluble in the liquid, RF value will be close to 1, but less than 1 for substances that are rather insoluble in the liquid, RF value close to the 0 but more than 0. Thank you.